There is something called humanities. It is a general curiosity, knowledge of art forms in historic periods, which teach you about the sequence of events of the musical styles which you will have to be an interpreter for. Naturally, you can read articles and you can read books. It won't make you play better in terms of technique, but it makes a big difference when you bring in the purpose of it, why you do it, how you choose to delay a phrase or not. Each time period carries its style, its time period's context. And of course, we play it on pianos today, which are outside of the context of when they were written, either technically for the pedals, or the keys action, or the length of sound, or the resonance, or even the projection acoustically for large audiences, which wasn't the case in the past, or recording engineering, where we can capture the sound from very close up. So the aesthetics of the sounds evolve, the aesthetics of the phrasing evolves, the aesthetics of the articulation evolves, the aesthetics of breathing, the texture, the inner voices, the dialogue between the parts is so important, because you create, as a pianist, when you play a piece, a universe in which you nest your own expression, which is the translation of the vibrating membrane which you become of what you read from the text, and how your reading and your hearing translates through your playing without any filter. Of course, all these are easy things to say. Is hard to obtain, because you have to control so many things, divide your attention in so many directions. I find it fascinating, because we are in a situation of a conductor and an orchestra in one, but more choir also, or solo instrument. And when composers make transcriptions, it's an evocation of a symphony on the piano, or the oratorio through the piano. I find this to be very relevant, because humanities is the awareness of the world's history of art. Of course, it appears so encyclopedic that one can be lost in the centuries and centuries of music production, and repertoire for specific instruments are adapted from. Naturally, the technique is essential, because you cannot play what you haven't heard, but you cannot hear what you cannot play. And the reading comes between the hearing and the playing. It's a very fantastic combination, in fact. It's a dialogue between the composer's intent, your understanding through the analytical reading of the page, and then how it translates through your fingers. The dosage of the voicing, the subtlety of the touches, the fingerings that you will use to organize the singing, if it were of a melodic line imitated on the piano. Finger legato, substitutions, allowing to have connected fingers without the pedal, which is harmonic compared to the melodic. And if blurred, then you don't hear the clarity of the enunciation, while connection by the palm support and the strong but straight fingers, deep and fast in the keys, even in softer dynamics. which is so counterintuitive. But once you get to this point, you feel like through the energy going through the knuckles, you feel how the sounds connect as if you have an invisible bow, connect by touching the strings as the string players do, or the intensity of the air through the column that comes through breathing and then exhaling while performing either a wind instrument or singing. Plus, of course, the lyrics, which the instruments only hint, but you have to speak when you sing the words. In other words, when you start the piano, often the skills are predominant. And then we'll see for the grammar later, like, how later? Because to sight read is to be untied, to hear and to organize the pitches, even if they're tuned on the piano, you don't have to search for them like on a string instrument or with your voice. But the ear guides you. It's a monitor and a searcher at the same time. Then the fingers organize with the right fingering how to display it. Then you have to practice to organize the independence of 5/4 or 4/3, which are usually not so naturally independent since they have a common tendon for each group of two. Whenever 1, 2, and 3 have their own, so the grabbing fingers. And then if you organize your understanding towards your capacity of bringing, especially for the difference of approach for the pressure on the tip of the finger on the cushion when you want to voice out something and less another. It would be secondary voice, or in terms of fugues, different entrances. It's really shadows and lights, but ultimately imaginary colors for most, or perhaps tastes for others. And I believe that the reason for which humanities are so important is that you have to situate the piece in the context of its artistic existence, when it was composed, when it was performed, how people perceived the music, what books they read, what literature they were inspired by, what paintings they were interested to discover when they traveled or had the opportunity to look into encyclopedias, because that's not the internet of today. And also, what were the hierarchies of the composers of the time for the opera, the ballet, the chamber music, the sacred music? Who was heard, who was played, who was considered? And what else was the composer composing at the time of the piece, as well as what other composers were composing? In other words, you have to take the time, besides practicing repetitively, short-term, mid-term, repetitively with meaning and concentration, not just meaningless repetition of the patterns. You practice with purpose, with a meaning, to structure, organize this sentence to the next sentence, organize a phrase, which becomes a narrative storytelling, and then where you breathe, even if it's artificial, because you don't need to, but you have to, in order to make the voice sing and sound as imitated, sang with even imaginary lyrics. This imagination doesn't come out of the blue. It doesn't come out of, oh, I like it that way, or I feel it like that way, which is already essential, but not sufficient. You don't have to be erudite to be a pianist, but to be a pianist, you have to play through your experience of philosophy of life, or philosophy of death, or philosophy of love, or philosophy of meaning itself, and then how you place the contrast, the dynamics, the articulation, the attacks of the sounds, the resonance, the delayed resolutions, the affects, the appoggiaturas versus also on top of suspensions, delay release of attention, what is a consonance and what is a dissonance in the 16th, 17th, 18th century and in which country, and how you evolve through defining a mezzo forte in Schubert is not a mezzo forte in Beethoven or a mezzo forte in Liszt. It's not only instrumental, it's also choosing to follow the blossoming of the piano as an instrument, from the clavichord, harpsichord, fortepiano to the romantic piano to the modern piano. Pitches rise, length of sound, the very structure of the strings out of steel, and the fact that you have iron board that holds all the strings so strongly held that you can project more with the hammers than with the pinched harpsichord system. Every step enhances something and loses something. You lose subtlety, you gain power on the piano versus the harpsichord. But does it mean that is more or more is better? No, it's different. And in fact, the composers adapted to the instruments. But of course, you play harpsichord music on the piano, romantic music of fortepiano on the modern piano. Therefore, it's in the dynamic ranges through your culture of understanding that comes from the humanities that you will define a framework, just like painters define when they do their landscapes, which colors they'll use. Will it be a scale of gray, a scale of blue, or different impressions of depth or blur, or what you bring in the foreground? And the watcher of a painting has the right to, in the eye of the beholder, to come up with what they see or what they want it to be, what they are seeing. In the reading of a score of music, you can do the same, but when somebody is playing it for you and you just sit there listening, you are in fact guided by this music director of the storytelling of the piece within their taste about what and how much of where should be in. From the rubato to the tempi, to the pulse, to the syncopation, to the offbeat, to the downbeat, to the breathing beyond where it's written rhythmically, where you can add a little nanobeat if you need to restate a sentence, and if it starts on an upbeat or a downbeat. Of course, one can analyze the harmonic progression, the tonalities. You can be aware in which key you travel from and to and towards or away from. Basically playing with a GPS, not just the visual memorization of the score, but the understanding of the evolution of the composer's ideas in terms of how they develop their thoughts and through which tonalities they go, and if they do atonal or tone pitched, centered, or multi post-tonal, centered, off-centered. Then the sense of tension and release changes too. If you play Berg or you play Schönberg, and you don't express the same way the meaning of the line, because you know what you want to hear, what you want to bring, either because you heard it by somebody else, either because somebody who you trust convinced you, a teacher, for instance, or just wanting to imitate somebody who you like in this repertoire, and then create your own meaning of why you're doing it. And also accept, therefore, to change mind. Because ultimately you're not bound to stay always in the same narrative. In some seasons of life, after you learn the piece, memorize it, performed it, go to the next in order to gather repertoire, pass juries, exams, and auditions. Then you grow up enough to choose what you play and then eventually prefer to develop a niche in a specific art period, form, style, where you want to really dig in deep to understand all the subtleties, intricacies that are there, like synonymous of a word in the poetry. Same thing in which note is chosen, where it's placed, how it's brought out, what you should do, because you are in your hands the capacity to bring something more than another, not only intuitively, but also not only analytically either, because it might be not necessarily spontaneous, but when you revisit the piece after you learned it for another, let's say, 20 years, 4 or 5 times through the times, you only start then having the piece live with you, and you start delivering it as your truth. And you can change mind about it, and you say, later in my seasons of life, I prefer it in this tempo with this phrasing and this articulation. Either I couldn't, either I didn't know, but now that I might be, my conviction is more this way. And I think it's a very important, beautiful, and meaningful thing, not to appear to not have an opinion, but to constantly, like scientists, question the status quo and say, okay, if the tradition is to play it that way, if I learned it that way, when I revisit it, when I replay it later, I already add another layer of awareness of what I do, or desire of what I want to do in the piece and how I want it to be communicated to the audience. Then, of course, comes the stage fright, if there is any, or the instrument that you don't control as well as you wish, because you don't play on your own piano in general. Therefore, you have to adapt also to these contingencies of acoustics, action of the keyboard, perception of how much of what you do goes through, like as if you have ears in the acoustic of the whole, while you have obviously the ears on your keyboard. And imagine how it projects in terms of the volume of the resonance in the whole. You want clarity and precision. You want pedal for the harmonic coating. You want clarity for the melodic statement. But the whole thing is anyway enveloped, surrounded by the acoustics of the place where you play it. If it's a church, a hall, a room, a studio, then eventually the tempi won't come the same way, because you want more clarity in a blurrier room with more resonance. You might play a little slower. Do you do it intellectually or intuitively? Well, you learn with age how to adapt to the instruments, if it's heavier action or not, or you feel it is heavier. How do you manage it? Muscularly, the tendons, the position of the placement of the finger on the keys. Do you play it on the edge of the keys or in the middle of the keys? How do you obtain a pianissimo in the lower action, which is heavier in the concert pianos than in the top? How you balance the anticipation, like a conductor who gives a departure, but the musician has already intaken air and then exhales to perform it. How do you do that when you have to do it imaginarily? And of course you have so many layers that overlap. I find it fascinating because, in fact, you have an intention, a clarity of view. I know exactly what I want to do with the piece. I'm just going there and delivering it. Because I practiced, I repetitively practiced, I purposely repeat, repetitively practiced, with a purpose, not only for an autopilot. It's not perhaps the right word, but muscular memory, that sounds better. That will take in driving seat when you have to deal with all these unexpected things of stage, between stage fright, acoustics, instrument, perception of the attention of the audience, or how the jury judges you and then you don't feel like playing for friends. Obviously, that's goes without to say. But the piece is the piece, and the piece dialogues with you, and you dialogue with the piece, and this dialogue is translated to the audience. And even if those who listen to you know the piece and judge you professionally, or those don't know the piece and just love to hear a storytelling, then you have to be convincing, not pedagogically, not detailedly, but very intuitively. Like as if you say, ladies and gentlemen, with my piano of today, like a horse and a horseman, we are going to tell you this story, like in a chamber group with my colleagues. Here it's my dead, if not sometimes alive, composer colleague, and I will play for you this piece, which you might know, which you might expect, which you might have an opinion about, or perhaps you're open-minded because you don't know it. So those who expect some subtleties might be surprised. Those who don't expect them don't know what they're not supposed to expect. So they're charmed by some kind of combination of the whole, which is your presentation, your charisma, your own presence. Even if it's not over-involving to serve the piece, at some level you have to own it in order to say it through you, even if you're a humble, resonant membrane of the composer's inspiration. You assume that what it is, and you play it. Of course, the precision of the notation brings us to many details, which edition, how the marking, or how we don't care about that, and we just go for the pitches and the rhythms, and then the rest we just play intuitively. Obviously, there are extremes in both cases, but I still think that the combination of all that is the best. Don't dry out your intuition with knowledge, and don't ignore the analytical aspect of the piece which you deliver, because you're the conductor and the orchestra and the composer, at least on the moment of the recreation on the spot. And of course it all, as soon as finished playing, vanishes in thin air, as if these imaginary structures were so real by the combination of the resonant sounds and the harmonics and all what it vehicles is a psychological statement about the character that's expressed through this, and that is perceived differently by each listener with or without their knowledge of the piece, the style, or the character, but they just receive it. And I think that's also very important to take in account, that you're responsible for bringing it the best the way you love it. And if you change the way you love it, well, you change the way you play it. Not right away, but with time. And I think this conviction of your performance comes from your constructed opinion about what you're supposed to do in the piece. Sometimes it's so obvious you don't question. Sometimes you have to wonder, what is it supposed to bring out there? Am I bringing this or that? There's so many things going on. If there are less going on, it's still not easy to know how much to bring out one compared to the other. Is anybody accompanying, anybody in the foreground? I think the awareness of nesting the piece you play in your understanding of the time period in which it was written, historically, not only history of music, but history itself, literature, not only music literature, but written literature, texts, poetry, novels, sonnets, the sound of the words in the language of the composer, it matters. Even if you don't speak all these languages. Of course, music is supposed to be universal language, but you have to have a lot of awareness of what you're hearing and what you want to bring out to be heard. When and how much. And of course, you listen to yourself in a recording after you played, and you start self-determining, oh, I didn't do this. I thought I produced more of that. This didn't come through. So your perception from the broadcaster, so to say, was not the same as the listener, which you do separately when you don't play by listening to the recording with the score. And you start realizing for the next performance how you're going to organize your thinking so that every time you enter in a different section, you already have the technique how to approach it, the very way to handle it on the keyboard sculpting, as well as the tracking of the melodic or harmonic or secondary voices motion, and how you're going to bring this to its arrival point. So the next point starts like another sentence with beautiful punctuations. In other words, you construct the storytelling, which is in the score, but necessarily goes through you bringing in all the. In fact, you bring it temporary life, even if after the performance it goes back to evaporation. And no matter how well or not well you played it, the next time other things will happen in other sections, and you have to work on transitions and preparations and anticipations and physical approach for the muscles compared to chords or fast articulations, or how you handle it and how you want it to come out. And progressively the gap between the two will reach the point where they will hold hand in hand, your intention and your realization. Blessed that day. I do my best to bring my students closest to it, even if it's mostly grains in a garden, which harvest will happen later than I might even see. But I know that with other information and influences than mine, if they trust mine, at some point they'll take something from mine, and it will be perhaps constructive of their own opinion of how to play it, mean it, state it, not just display it, but involve yourself humbly but fully in what the statement means to you, which you play, to the point to which those who won't know the piece will believe that you are the composer or the creator of the piece, even if you're the recreator as an interpreter. So it's not important if you compose or not. It's to think as a composer means outside of the box, but serve the box within the details of the box for what they are exactly meant to be, even if you're not sure you understand fully why and how they come up to be where they are. And you compare editions, manuscript, if they exist in photocopy, and you build the narrative of the piece from its conception till you. And of course, with the experience of the great performers or less great performers, one can have opinions, and you are entitled to yours and say, I like this with this performer more than this. And then you see how even interpretation evolves beyond the understanding of the piece and the instrument itself and the acoustics and the means of transporting the music from the soul to the soul through the ears and by the fingers and the pedals and all the imaginarium that you build around what you want to be strictly presenting. It's so inspirational and at the same time so daunting, because it seems like an endless task to put together all these elements in one single performance that goes with the unexpected of the moment, as if it's planned, for most of which it might be, hopefully. Thank you.